killed in Ford's Theater. Kennedy was killed in a Ford automobile known as a Lincoln Continental. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. Number 8, both men were succeeded by vice presidents with the last name Johnson. Both presidents were succeeded by vice presidents with the last name Johnson. Number 9, both vice presidents that succeeded them were Southern Democrats. Both were Southern Democrats, which was unusual with Lincoln because what was Lincoln? He was a Republican, but he nominated a Southern Democrat to run with him, not having any idea, remember, that he'd be assassinated. Remember the 10-year of Office Act and all the crap that Johnson took, and he almost got impeached, and Edmund G. Ross was the final vote that kept him from being impeached, and Edmund Ross ended up in one of Kennedy's courageous acts in his book, Profiles in Courage, whatever, okay? Anyway, both were Southern Democrats. Both vice presidents were former senators as well. Both were former senators. Now we'll get a little weird. Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln, was born in 1808. Lyndon Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy, was born in 1908, 100 years apart. Andrew Johnson was born in 1808, Lyndon Johnson 1908, 100 years apart. Number 12, the last name of Kennedy's private secretary was Lincoln, Evelyn Lincoln. Number 13, the first name of Lincoln's private secretary was John. It was John. First name of Lincoln's private secretary was John. Who shot Lincoln? Number 14, who shot Lincoln? John Wilkes Booth was born in 1839. Lee Harvey Oswald was born in 1939. 100 years apart. John Wilkes Booth, 1839, Lee Harvey Oswald, 1939. 100 years apart. Number 15, both assassins were murdered before being brought to trial. Remember, Booth was killed in a barn. Oswald was killed in the basement of the Dallas police station. So both men were murdered before they were brought to trial. I like 16 as a good one. Where did Booth shoot President Lincoln? In a theater. Where was Lee Harvey Oswald apprehended? Theater. So Abraham Lincoln was shot from a theater. Oswald was apprehended in a theater. Hey, how about 17? This is pretty good. The name Lincoln and the name Kennedy each have 7 letters. The name Lincoln and Kennedy each have 7 letters. How about 18? Vice presidents. Johnson and Johnson each have 7 letters. You're thinking, well, that's not pretty good. Well, let's go a little further then and go to 19. Andrew Johnson and Lyndon Johnson each have 13 letters. Andrew Johnson and Lyndon Johnson, when you combine them, 13. Hey, guess what? Lee Harvey Oswald and John Wilkes Booth each have 15 letters. There you go. The Lincoln-Kennedy coincidences. How about that, huh? John Wilkes Booth and Lee Harvey Oswald each have 15 letters. Okay, I want you to take out your handout on Mike Mansfield, please. Take out your handout on Mike Mansfield. Looks like this. Everybody take out their handout. It looks like this. I'll tell you a little bit about this guy. And I'll try to do it without emotion because Mike was a very good friend of mine. Been gone a long time, but hardly a day goes by I don't think about what he might be doing. He's a very, very unbelievable human being. So everybody take out their handouts on Senator Mike Mansfield of Montana. Now, of course, I got to tell you a quick story. You know, when I really got into this is I was teaching this class many years ago, and I was showing them a video of Mansfield giving the eulogy at Kennedy's Rotunda service. And I tried to click it like you often know I do, before the name come up to ask the kids if they knew who that was. Not one kid in the class knew who the guy was. Not one. And this guy may be the most famous politician that the state of Montana ever had or ever will have. So I thought that time we're missing the boat. Now I realize this is a little off kilter because you're not from Montana, but this was a very interesting individual and I think you need to know about him. You can read through this with me. Mike Mansfield was born to Irish immigrant parents in New York City on March 16, 1903. When he was 3, his mother died and he was sent to Montana, where he grew up in Great Falls, Montana with relatives. He left home in 1917 at the age of 14, dropped out of 8th grade and joined the United States Navy. During World War I, 10 of Mansfield's 19 months of service were spent overseas. After serving a 1-year hitch in the Army, he enlists in the Marine Corps, serving in the Western Recruiting Division in San Francisco. And he was discharged from the Marines on November 9th, 1922, and as a result, he had served in 3 different branches of the military by the time he was 19. Incredible. Now, after he was discharged from the Marines, he returned to Montana and worked in the Butte, Montana mines until 1930. Not yet completing grade school or high school, he was admitted by examination to the Montana School of Mines in Butte as a special student. That would be Montana Tech, one of the best engineering schools ever. Okay? He studied there from 1927 to 1928 and met a Butte High School teacher by the name of Maureen Hayes, who was impressed with his unusual talents. Maureen urged him to complete his education, so Mansfield quit work. With the financial and moral support of Maureen, he transferred to Montana State University. Actually, the University of Montana was first called Montana State. And then when Montana State University came into being, they moved Montana State to Bozeman and called that one the University of Montana, which is an interesting story. On September 13th of 1932, Mike and Maureen were married, and shortly afterwards, Mike received his bachelor's degree. This is a guy that did not complete grade school or high school. He completed his master's degree in history in 1934, writing on Korean-American diplomatic relations. He was invited to stay at the University of Montana, where he worked in administration and taught Latin American and Far Eastern history until 1942. He has remained a professor of history at the University of Montana on a permanent tenure over the last 5 decades. Still is today, even in death. Encouraged by Maureen and his students to run for political office, Mansfield was elected to Congress, which had been the House of Representatives, in 1942 and served 5 terms. Mansfield was elected to the United States Senate on November 4th, 1952, and was re-elected to the Senate in 1958, 1964, and 1970. In 1957, Mike Mansfield was elected Assistant Senate Majority Leader and served in that position until 1961. In January of 1961, he was elected Senate Majority Leader after Lyndon Johnson was elected Vice President of the United States. Mansfield served as Senate Majority Leader from 1961 until his retirement from the Senate in January of 1977, holding the position longer than any other person in American history to this date. Senator Mansfield's interest in the Vietnam War spanned 20 years, and he was a leading voice in Washington in the late 1960s to stop the war, so his name will come up again in our lectures later. In April of 1977, he was appointed U.S. Ambassador to Japan by President Jimmy Carter, and this was very unusual, and reappointed to the same position in 1981 by President Ronald Reagan. Why would that be unusual?
Because usually you get rid of the cabinet of the last one.
And especially when they're Democrat, and Reagan's a Republican. Even a Republican president renominated him to that. That tells you a lot about his character. Mansfield retired from political life in January of 1989. One of President Reagan's last public appearances is when he presented Mike Mansfield with the Presidential Medal of Freedom in January of 1989. That is the highest award that you can be given as a civilian in this country. He said, Mike's greatest contribution to me as president and to President Carter before me, to the people of Montana he represented so ably in the Senate, and to all Americans, has been a citizen statesman, one who knows his people and who conveys their values and aspirations in everything he does. On March 16, 1999, after he retired, a flag was flown in Senator Mansfield's honor by Virginia Senator John Warner. The flag was then presented to Mansfield in commemoration of the bicentennial of the convention of the First Congress. In other words, a flag was flown over the Capitol in his honor by Senator John Warner. John Warner is probably best known, and you're too probably young to even know this, but he was married to the beautiful actress, sex symbol, Elizabeth Taylor. Have you ever heard of her? Anybody? Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm getting too old. I'm going to have to retire pretty quick. But anyway, she was like the best thing going at the time. This is an interesting story. When we visited Senator Mansfield, one of the several trips he went there, when I was at Roberts School in Roberts, Montana, he gave us that flag. Gave us the flag that was flown over in his honor. And he gave that to us on April 14th of 1999, and it's still very proudly displayed in their school. Mike's wife, Maureen, passed away on September 20th of 2000 of natural causes at the age of 95. Until October 5th of 2001, Mike Mansfield was very active and worked daily for Goldman Sachs Incorporated, advising American and Asian leaders on the large questions about American-Asian relations. On October 5th, 2001, Senator Michael Joseph Mansfield passed away at 7:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time at Walter Reed Hospital in Washington, D.C. due to heart complications at the age of 98. This guy worked almost until he was still working when he was 98 years old. And we used to take the kids there, and he would set us in a round table and answer questions. And he was a very quiet man. He never said a lot. And kids would ask him a question, and he'd give an answer that might be 30 seconds long, and go, a little windy on that one. And if you talk to the kids that I had in Montana, they'll tell you that was the absolute greatest thing they ever did. My oldest son had the opportunity to see Mike Mansfield. Sad to say my youngest son didn't, because he died before then. But let me tell you what kind of a guy he was before I tell you a couple more stories. He's buried in Arlington Cemetery. We will certainly stop there and pay our respects as we do every year. We will each bring a pebble to put on his gravestone. I will bring those for you. That just is a symbol that you visited his gravesite. And we always leave a t-shirt there. And those t-shirts stay there until the end of the day, and they pick that stuff up. But it's something I've done for years and years and years. But Mike Mansfield was a tremendous politician, Senate Majority Leader longer than any man in American history. As we walk up to the Kennedy gravesite, we will walk up a road that leads to an intersection called Grant Avenue. And you come to a Y. And the right takes you to John Kennedy's gravesite, and the left takes you to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And right in view, right in front of you when you take that, is Senator Mansfield's gravesite. Now, what would you expect that to have on it? What would you, I mean, pretty big, pretty nice, might list his accomplishments. Mike Mansfield made it very, very clear when he was buried that this is all he wanted on his gravesite. Michael Joseph Mansfield, Private, United States Marine Corps. That's all he wanted on there. And I really adhere to his wishes, and I'm happy for that. But, God, people walk by that every day and have no idea who he really was. But that's what he wanted. He could have put Senate Majority Leader. He could have put 3 branches of the military that he served in. He could have had a tombstone, in my view, as wide as that wall back there. But this is all he chose to have. I'll pass it on. We will stop there for sure and pay our respects. We do every year. Tell you a couple stories about him. He's an interesting guy. The University of Montana wanted to honor him, and so they wanted to put a statue of him outside the campus of the University of Montana. And he said he would not have a statue put up unless his wife was in the statue. I mean, you think about that. We all talk about loving our spouses and our girlfriends and boyfriends and all that. Everybody has that say. But I'm telling you, in all the years I've lived, I don't know another man that loved his wife more than this guy did. Just adored her. When she passed away in 2000, she was first buried in Arlington. And what they do is they would bury her a little deeper than normal, and then that tombstone that you see that's going around would be on the back. It says wife Marine, and it was actually facing the front because he wasn't dead yet. When he died, then they take his casket and put it on top of where she's buried, and then the tombstone turns, and then he's on the front and she's on the back. But anyway, he was really lost when she died. It was a real tough thing. And I'll never forget this. Mark Roscoe was a good friend of mine. He was a longtime governor of Montana, a really good guy. And one of the kids asked Mike Mansfield when we were in D.C. and meet with him, what do you think of Mark Roscoe, our governor? And Mike, again, was very quiet. He'd always sit back and blink his eyes a little bit and think. And he said, one of the greatest Montana's ever had. That's all he said. Didn't go into a bunch of detail. But I mean, that was quite a tribute from Mike Mansfield. So I got back from our trip, and I thought, you know, do you think maybe Mark would like to know that the greatest diplomat, I mean, Mark was a Democrat, probably the greatest symbol of the Democratic Party in Montana, obviously, is Mike Mansfield. So I called Governor Roscoe on the phone, and he didn't answer the phone. I left a message, and I wasn't thinking. After I got done, I thought, well, what a dummy. They're in the middle of the session with the legislature. He's not going to, you know, answer the phone call, and he's certainly probably not going to call me back. About 15 minutes later, he called me back, and he said, what's up? And I said, well, I just had to tell you this. I said, I thought this is something you should know. And I told him what I told you, that one of the kids had asked and what his response was. And Mark says to me, he says, you know, I can't believe how much that means to me today. I've had the worst day ever with this legislature, trying to get them to pass some things that I think are in the best interest of the people in Montana. I can't tell you how this brightens my day. And he asked me how he was and such. And I said, you know, Senator Mansfield, I said, I feel bad. Every single state in the Union gets 2 statues in the Capitol. You'll see Wyoming's. Montana had Charlie Russell, a famous Western artist, and Jeanette Rankin, who we've talked about, that was the lady that voted against both World War I and II. But she only had 2. Not to have Mike Mansfield in there is just really sad. But we've made our choices, and you can't switch. And a lot of states made early choices, especially the first 13 colonies, and when they become states, those people have got people from that era. But whatever. But I said to him, I said, you know, it's really too bad we cannot do something for Mike at the state capitol. And I'm not being arrogant. Roscoe took that and fled and went with that, started raising money, and then his term ran out, and his lieutenant governor, Judy Martz, who just recently passed away, is a good friend of mine also, she kept this thing going. And finally they raised the funds, and they put up a statue of Mike Mansfield in the Capitol. Now, he was not alive to see it, but you know what they put in the statue with him? Knowing what he think, his wife. Yeah, it was incredible. And so Judy Martz invited 100 people in the state to the dedication of the statue, and I got an invitation. It was maybe the greatest thing that ever happened to me in that setting. And the story I'm going to tell you is, remember I told you about the PT-109 tie clip? Well, I was talking to the artist that did the statue. He was there, obviously. And he said to me, and we were talking about teaching, he goes, well, can you answer a question for me? He says, he didn't have a clue. He said, what is the significance of this tie tack that I put on his tie in the statue? So I told him the story. And he was so taken back, he said, where could I get one of those? And I said, well, I'll tell you what I do. I'll do. I said, do you have the proofs, the first pictures ever taken of that statue? And he said, yeah. I said, I'll trade you a PT-109 tie tack for those proofs. And he said, okay. So I gave him the tie tack, and he sent me the proofs, which actually are in my safety deposit box, because the first pictures are the most important. But Mansfield was quite a character, and he was very, very loyal. The thing that saddens me, the last year we were there, if you can believe this sounds stupid, but it was very touching. The last year he was there, the kids left, and the secretary asked me to come back in, and he sat down with me, and he handed me this little box, kind of a beat-up box. He said, here, I want you to have these. They were his wife's Jell-O molds. I mean, it was just kind of corny, but they were his wife's Jell-O molds. And I don't know if you've ever seen them. I'll have to bring them and show you. I have them at home. But he gave me those. And then he gave me another flag for the School of Roberts, which told me what? When people start giving things away, what are they thinking? Might not see it yet. And I didn't. He died before we got there the next year. So, anyway, story about a great man. I want you to have that information. In the Senate chambers, this is a great big, huge painting of Senator Mansfield that's at least as tall. It's probably not, it's not as wide. It probably goes from the bulletin board to the end of the Martin Luther King poster, but at least as high or maybe higher than the floor to the ceiling in the Senate chambers. Very well respected man. So I thought you should probably know that. Monday, we're going to do a little handout, or excuse me, we're going to watch the video, and then the last thing we're going to do before we go on is I'm going to tell you whatever became of Jackie Kennedy after all this happened in her life. Then we'll kind of leave with that and then go into controversy. Okay, anybody got any questions at all? Okay, we'll have this video, thank you, we'll have this video for a couple of days